Meta and its on again and off again relationship with media properties. There was Facebook Instant Articles, Facebook Watch, gaming, Metaverse. None of them quite landed.
Facebook has been most successful when they've followed rather than leading. They've shifted from being this company that invented the first of its kind of something to a company that has succeeded largely by acquiring other successes.
But were they the company that started off by inventing things? Whether it was Friendster and MySpace, what Mark and the rest of the team have always done, and to their credit very well, was being able to just execute better than anyone.
It's hard to create the second version of something. It's always going to have that feel of being like the B-list or the second-rate version. Or TikTok versus Reels. The cultural feel of being the copycat can be enough that it turns people off.
There's actually a gap to be filled these days for a social platform that's actually social. If Meta, instead of trying to integrate all these entertainment things that never really hit the mark, went full speed ahead on, we're a social platform that is actually social and that is our brand, I wonder if that could be actually a unique selling point, which is ironic.
Today, we're going to talk about Meta. The company's suite of products reach nearly half of the people that live in the entire world. There are nearly 4 billion people that are monthly active users of at least one of Meta's products. But something that has always stuck out to me about Meta is that when you look at the products that it's released to try to leverage its massive user base with the more traditional forms of media, a lot of those products have came and went. You look at Facebook's Instant Articles, Facebook Watch, and it's not like these products haven't had success at times. We all remember when Red Table Talk was the talk of the town. Who didn't miss the Will and Jada Smith talk about their entanglement? Or Tom versus Time, or Ball in the Family, and things like that. But Meta has also dived deep into podcasting. They've focused on music videos. There's been a big focus on Instagram Live, especially in the pandemic. From a prioritization perspective, a lot of these things have came and went. And to be frank, you can probably throw the metaverse itself into that category. So what gives? What is Facebook's strategy that lends itself to starting and stopping some of these products, and why haven't they stuck in that type of way? That's what we're going to dig into and answer in this episode. So come join me and Tati Cirisano from MIDiA Research as we untangle the ecosystem of Meta and answer that exact question. Why is the company that reaches more people than anyone else, the social media platform, not able to make traditional media work in that type of way? Let's dive in. All right, we're here to talk about Meta and its on again and off again relationship with media properties, and we're joined with Tati Cirisano from MIDiA Research. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Dan. Great to be back as always with another very meaty topic. Lots to get into.
Yeah, this is a big one. And I think that Meta probably touches a lot of people in so many different ways with all the different tools that they have. But I was thinking, you yourself, do you have an on-again, off-again relationship with Meta yourself?
Very on-again, off-again relationship. I haven't used Facebook in a really long time. I haven't deleted my account or anything, but I deleted the app and haven't used it.
Technically speaking, you would not be one of the nearly 4 billion monthly active users of a Meta product.
Not. And yet here I am, about to opine for an hour on the company. I got things to say, I promise.
Right now, I mostly use Facebook to either see family updates or if I want to check in and see what friends from high school are up to. And honestly, sometimes it's just force of habit. It's not necessarily that I even have this like conscious, oh, let me go see what's happening on Facebook today. You just tap through with the apps, no different than you're going through Twitter, you're going through Instagram. It's almost by design. They want you to check in and do each of those things.
Is that different than what you use Instagram for?
I'd say with Instagram, part of it was a bit more work related because we do have accounts there. We're showing and promoting the episodes that we have on the show. So I would definitely check that more often. And times where I feel like similarly, maybe I've wanted to take a detox or take a break, I still need to have some type of connection there, right? So even if we have a scheduler, we're using other platforms, I still need to be able to tap in and see, okay, how's this going? And you also get DMs too. I don't know if you saw this thing, but I'm not trying to be like T-Pain where you don't check Instagram for years and you get 100 messages, like years of DMs from business opportunities you lost. Like I still have to check on all these platforms.
I ask because it's one of the things we're going to talk about, but just the use of platforms for keeping up with friends versus entertainment versus business. It's changed a lot, obviously, since when Facebook debuted and even when Instagram was in its early days and it was really about keeping up with friends. Now we're doing everything on social media. We're shopping, we're Googling how to do things, we're entertaining ourselves, like so much more than it used to be.
Agreed. And I think that a lot of those changes also tie back to some of these changes that gave us the thought for this episode too. When we talked about on again, off again relationship, there's a deep line of products that Facebook and Meta more broadly have launched specifically to enter the media and entertainment landscape in some type of way. There was Facebook Instant Articles that was pitched as something for publishers to be able to reach the billions of people that are using Facebook and be able to do that quicker. There was Facebook's investment with video. More recently with Facebook Watch, you saw shows like Red Table Talk. We saw it as well with podcasting. That was a very short-lived experience that Facebook had there with podcasting. You saw it with gaming. You saw it with the metaverse too. You also saw it with Instagram Live to some extent. And I'm sure there are individual reasons for why a lot of these products came and went, but it's hard not to take a step back and say, each of these things does have some type of through line intersecting in media, intersecting in entertainment, but but none of them quite landed the way that Meta intended it to.
It feels like the ways that Meta has made Instagram a little bit more of an entertainment platform. Entertainment is not how people are primarily using that platform. And we see it in our data too, like at MIDiA and our consumer surveys. We actually asked people quite recently, what do you spend the most time on? But when you look at Facebook users in particular, it's an outlier because their top reason is keeping up with friends. And it's by far the top reason. Entertainment is far behind. So I think it's just not maybe the right fit for the platform. It also maybe has to do with the user base because Facebook has a slightly older user base. And so people are not using it for the same reasons that the TikTok generation use TikTok. So maybe it's just like a misunderstanding of the reasons people use the platform, or even though they understand why, they're trying to change it and they're not really able to.
This is similar to something you and I have talked about endlessly with TikTok and some of the things that TikTok has tried over the years, because they're probably the most extreme example of an entertainment platform. Why didn't TikTok music and the DSP work in that type of way they expected to? Why didn't TikTok's metaverse experience with The Weeknd take off the same way that Roblox is with Lil Nas X or Fortnite's with Travis Scott in the same type of way? And it's because despite the number of users that are on that platform, they're not using TikTok to have a metaverse experience. They're not using TikTok to choose an on-demand setting which songs they want to listen to. They're doing it because they want to lean back and be entertained. They want to have their own personalized algorithm that tells them exactly what they want, where they don't even have to decide who to follow because that's the nature of the platform. And right. Meta, granted, it's a much broader platform that has a whole suite of products. They are trying to make the platform more like insert competitor that is the flavor of the month for the past 20 years. It's been TikTok and everything you've seen with Instagram and Reels, or even Facebook and Reels and Stories. A lot of that copying what you've seen from other platforms too. That's the exact type of thing that we've seen there. So I think it's hard for a lot of these other things to stick, but I think the reason why it makes sense for Meta to still try it, because they generate so much money. It's a company that has been profitable for quite some time. When you have that much money, you can operate a bit like an internal VC fund where you have your own base to be like, hey, even if 90% of this stuff doesn't work out, we want to be able to do it because the 10% or even the 1% that does could take off because we have more users than anyone.
Totally. I don't necessarily fault them for trying all of these things. And if entertainment is the biggest competitor for these platforms, if the Netflixes of the world are the biggest competitors, why would you not just try to bring those things onto your platform? It's just another example of how you can't really change consumer behavior or try too hard to go against the grain of it. And that was another thing that I wanted to bring up. How I had sent you this newsletter from Garbage Day. It was about how tech companies used to succeed by inventing tools to basically enhance the things that consumers were already doing. You already want to connect with your friends, here's an easier way to do it. You already want to take photos, here's an app where you can share them. Whereas now they've shifted increasingly to telling people what they should be doing instead, whether that's you should be buying crypto, or you should be getting ready for AI to take over, or you should be adopting the metaverse. And yeah, sometimes you need to be ahead of the game in that sense, but it's also a big risk to try and go against the grain of consumer behavior. I think largely Facebook has been most successful when they've followed rather than leading. And even within that, most successful when they've acquired rather than building. So they've shifted from being this company that invented the first of its kind of something to a company that has succeeded largely by acquiring other successes.
But were they the company that started off by inventing things? I feel like your comparison probably dates back even then, right? Whether it was Friendster and MySpace that were bubbling up during that time frame, and what Mark and the rest of the team have always done, and to their credit very well, was being able to just execute better than anyone on a lot of those things.
Maybe it's always been their strategy of recognizing what's working and either copying it or just buying it.
The one thing, though, and you mentioned this before about Meta doing this, and then maybe they get a bit more criticism than others, and I do think that's true, and probably maybe some of that is a bit unfair, because if you are the biggest company in the space and you're doing the things that others are also doing, then people are obviously going to look at you more so because you have the scale, you have the size, and your distribution and global reach has much more impact than a company like Twitter/X copying what other competitors do. It reminds me of a lot of the criticisms that you and I hear in music. People will often talk about it's Spotify's fault. But when have you ever heard someone say that, oh, Amazon Music is ruining the music industry?
Right,
you don't hear
right.
people say that, and they have the same exact product. It just
Totally.
reaches less people.
Yeah, and I think also it's hard to create the second version of something. It's always going to have that feel of being like the B-list or the second-rate version or whatever, even if it's superior. I think about how the iPhone is still so dominant in the West, even though people technically would agree that the Android is superior, but people don't want green bubbles, so they don't buy it. So it's like the branding of it is sometimes everything. Like TikTok versus Reels, like the cultural feel of being the copycat can be enough that it turns people off, or it just causes that app to have a different feel than the original, even if they have the exact same capabilities, which is what we're seeing now with every major social platform has pretty much the same feature stack, but the sort of vibe of all of them is totally different. I think that it makes the competition a lot fiercer because it's a lot easier to control like competing based on features than it is to shape like the vibe or how people use your platform. The other thing that's changed is just the increasing role of algorithms and how it's arguably not the feature stack, but the algorithm itself that differentiates these platforms. This is something that I'm not by any means an expert in, but I would think that it's harder to copy someone else's algorithm than it is to copy their feature. You look at TikTok and how its algorithm is the reason that it's become so popular and so addictive. And it doesn't really feel like other platforms have been able to replicate that.
It's a secret sauce. That's the Coca-Cola formula.
Yeah, and I hate just saying the algorithm. But yeah, I do feel that having a proprietary algorithm that's really good has become a more valuable asset than having a feature stack, because feature stacks can be copied much more easily.
Agreed. One of the things that makes Meta unique in this aspect is obviously they get more attention for these things that they've started and stopped more so than other companies. But I also think that their opportunity cost is higher for the time and the initiatives because of how much money they make from their advertising. The ARPU that they have, Facebook specifically, is so much higher than even Instagram itself, even though it lives in the same platform, so much higher than TikTok and Snapchat. The last numbers I saw, it was just under $50 global average revenue per user. But then if you look at North America, it's well over $220. And that trumps any other platform that you have there. So that just increases the bar that any of these other initiatives, whether it is instant articles or it's podcasting or it's the metaverse or it's any of these things. And granted, not all of these things have canceled, but we're obviously naming the things that have either sunset or clearly faded in relevance the same way that they were a while ago. It's just hard to be able to justify that the same way that a company like Twitter or Snapchat or others can justify keeping some of these initiatives ongoing, because their threshold for seeing what may stick, they just have a longer time horizon because of the nature of those businesses.
Yeah, that's a really good point. If the new feature or product isn't reaching that super high threshold for success, they're not going to keep it around, even if it's doing relatively well. The bar is just so high.
I think there's cases for a lot of them to chat through, but two of them I thought about a lot, just given the nature of the work that we do. So one is instant articles, but two, also Facebook Watch. So I think first with instant articles, we saw entire companies grow massive valuations on the back of that, with your BuzzFeed, Vice's, Huffington Post, Complex, and others that leaned into the benefits that it had. But again, if Facebook doesn't feel like it's seeing the benefit and the ROI that it wants to see from that, which is what happened, or if it makes a few tweaks to the algorithm, that can change things dramatically for those companies. And we saw BuzzFeed and its billion-dollar valuation plus go down considerably. And I think a lot of those companies are shell of themselves, and it's largely because of how dependent they were with Facebook, whether it was specifically for instant articles or even a little bit on the video side too.
And that also brings up this inshitification being this idea that the platforms first serve the users and operate at a loss to get them locked in. Once the users are locked in, you get the suppliers locked in at the expense of the users. And then once both sides are locked in, you have no incentive as a platform to continue serving anybody except the shareholders. Where with instant articles, a lot of those companies got locked in and then Facebook just walked away from it.
I think in a lot of cases, the enshittification can often just be purely a price thing where the prices increase over time. And you've seen it with Airbnb, you've seen it with Uber, right? Those introductory prices seem great. Derek Thompson from The Atlantic has written about this. He called it the millennial lifestyle subsidy of all of these companies that were heavily VC backed in the early 2010s.
Yeah.
If you were leaning into these types of products, they were cheap as anything. And I think most of them, outside of the music streaming services up until 2 years ago, but most of them kept their prices dirt cheap. But then once the pressure came on and once they were able to get users and investors and the analysts wanted to see more, especially if they were public, they seemed less differentiated from a pricing point perspective than the companies or the industries that they had disrupted before that.
Yeah, it's an interesting compare and contrast because of how, with those examples, you're right, it's like mostly about price, whereas with the social platforms, it's been more so about just the experience and how now our experience on these platforms is so flooded with sponsored ads and incendiary content and all of these things, which is, of course, better from the perspective of ad dollars.
There was always felt like there was a little bit of this tug of war where people would have this feeling of, oh, I miss when insert social media platform here was like this, and then it grew and became this other type of thing. And when it grew, it likely increased the number of users that were on it. It changed features to naturally make more money, but people preferred it when it was this unprofitable thing. Facebook, of course, falls into this category. The first few months of Clubhouse blowing up falls into this category. The pre-pandemic era of Twitter definitely falls into this category. Twitter itself is an interesting example because this is a company that really hasn't been a strong business and its cultural influence far outweighed the monetization. So in many ways, it was a complete inverse of something like Meta, the way that it is in almost every way imaginable.
It also reflects these platforms' business models, which are selling user information to advertisers, and questions over like privacy and things like decentralization. Social platforms, including Meta, will have to reckon with both more and less in the future. More because I think people are more concerned about these things, but less potentially because of the Trump presidency, which we can get to. But yeah, I think that's another key tension. And WhatsApp is an example of that too, with encrypted and the founders being really against advertising and all of that.
Right, and even how that's beginning to shift as well, right? WhatsApp, I think the biggest thing for a while was how is this thing going to make money? And I think when it first started, the whole prop of, hey, it only cost $1, and this is back when people were paying for text messages. But as you've seen with the WhatsApp journey or with the Instagram journey as well, if the founders of these products that get acquired by Meta have an issue with Mark or with Meta leadership more broadly, the infamous "I'm the CEO, bitch" comes to play, where it's his company and in many ways was set up to give him the ultimate control and never be kicked off of the board and just give him more influence than anyone else has. And I'm not necessarily saying that's the right or wrong call, but I'm saying that as it relates to these things, yeah, a lot of it needs to fit that vision for where the CEO and the rest of the leadership team see everything going.
And part of me is always like, you have to see that coming, right? You have to see it coming that a CEO, especially one like Zuckerberg, is going to have the final say in any of these acquisitions.
You know, I could see that can easily be seen as a criticism, but on the other hand, if you look at what are the most beneficial acquisitions that have ever happened in tech, it's arguably Facebook buying Instagram for $1 billion. And look at what that's created today. How many times that's paid off. And I think that just based on some of the things I know you and I have dug into about WhatsApp, which we'll likely do at some point in the future, that's paid off too, where people thought it was crazy to buy that for $20 billion. And now you look at the influence of everything that's happened there. So again, it's hard not to have, at least on my end, that nuanced perspective of, sure, there's tension here, but there's also the tremendous impact from a business perspective, despite how I may personally feel as a user of some of these products.
And I feel like those two, Instagram and WhatsApp, are biggest success stories. I think with Instagram, going back to some of the stuff with the data and how people are using these platforms, we did find that Instagram was like the most widely used across these different use cases. So for entertainment, for friends, for shopping, for all these different things. And then with WhatsApp, it's such an interesting slow burn, like underdog story, because what started as just this messaging app has turned into a place where, first of all, the top messaging app in the world, but also a place where so many people do things that go beyond that. There's so many businesses that do so much of their operations through WhatsApp now. And there's probably like further ways that it could expand. So I feel like those two companies are really strong looking towards the future for Meta to have under its belt.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think Facebook itself is the platform, Instagram and WhatsApp feel like the three strongest ones. And the other ones, you have Messenger, Threads is relatively new. You have the VR experience, show reality. It's a pretty strong portfolio of things. Maybe to your point, things aren't as tightly connected in this Walt Disney synergy map kind of way that we had talked about with our Disney episode. But the Instagram to Facebook connection feels like it's there. The Instagram to Threads, even though I think it can feel a little bit choppy, at least in initial bit, did feel like it was connected. And I do think that the WhatsApp Facebook connection does make it a little bit easier to be able to find the people's contact info that you do want to find on WhatsApp.
I can't tell sometimes with Facebook if it's one of those things where, because I don't use it and it's not a big part of my circle's life, do I just think that it's dying while it's actually thriving elsewhere, or is this actually a trend? Because the way that I see Facebook is it's the top platform by like monthly active users from our surveys. And it just might take a while, in the same way that people still buy newspapers, even though everybody would agree that the future of news is not newspaper. I don't want to make you or anyone else listening to this sound like you're like the old fogey who still uses Facebook, but I more mean like in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, I just don't know if I see it as a platform that's going to stick around.
I think a few things there. I thought at first you were going to make a comparison to cable and be like, okay, I could see the cord cutting thing, but she went all the way into newspapers. Okay.
That's even worse.
That's even more extreme.
I could have given it a softer metaphor, but I went full speed ahead.
I'll say this, though. I don't think that you're wrong overall if we just zoom out and just how these things go, because even if a platform is strong and dominant, you still need to have cultural relevance in order to be able to see that growth continue, right? Because I think even if you just look outside of social media, radio still makes more money than podcasting does in terms of the amount of ad revenue that comes from it. The decay is just so slow, and it's slower than I think a lot of people realize, where folks like you and me, relatively younger, you may not consider me relatively young because I'm still a Facebook monthly active user.
But, I would cut the relatively. I consider you young.
But I do think that these things do have a slow burn to them, and it may not have the same cultural cachet as TikTok or as Instagram and others, but I do think that even 5-10 years from now, I wouldn't be surprised if it still is higher than a lot of the existing platforms. And if it's not, it's because something else new that we don't even know about yet came through and grew, as opposed to one of these other existing platforms that we're talking about.
I wonder if there's actually a gap to be filled these days for a social platform that's actually social. If Meta were to, instead of trying to integrate all these entertainment things that never really hit the mark, went full speed ahead on, we're a social platform that is actually social and that is our brand. I wonder if that could be actually a unique selling point, which is ironic, but do people want that back?
Do you think it exists in some way already? Because a lot of those conversations have gone to closed ecosystems. And even though those closed ecosystems, frankly, don't monetize as well for a lot of the things that we've talked about, they're still there, whether they support the company's broader efforts, whether it's Apple and having iMessage, or Meta having WhatsApp, or even subreddit communities and things like that. And a lot of that's probably shifted there, and it's probably not a coincidence that a lot of that is less about monetization, but more about stickiness to have these users be part of your broader ecosystem for things that are more lucrative, the way that Apple is with iMessage or with Meta is with WhatsApp.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has shifted to like those more niche. But I also feel like even with those platforms and even with something like Discord, it's still such an experience of one to many with a capital M. And I remember the days when you would log onto Facebook and there would be like, it would only really be your friends and family, and it wasn't like all these people that you didn't know. One of the things that's beautiful about the internet, about social media, is I have friends that I met because we were Twitter friends before we met in person and things like that. So that's also super valuable. But yeah, I do just wonder if people want a return to a more like a smaller group type of experience on social media.
Yeah, and that's where it feels like that tug of war is, because like similarly to you, met friends from Twitter, it's great, but like that period of Twitter that you and I are nostalgic for was not a good business. And I think it could be interesting to talk a little bit here about music, because I think some of these things are connected, but Instagram Live is also something I would put in this bucket, because even though Instagram Live is still an active thing, you can use it. It's clear that as a priority for the Instagram team, it doesn't seem to be as high as it was 5 years ago. I know that Tory Lanez is not someone that people are celebrating now, but Tory Lanez having quarantine radio with the pandemic was a thing that people were tapping into. When D Nice had that set and he had blown up a bit on Instagram, that felt like a whole thing. And then Versus and Tekashi 6ix9ine, and he was doing all those like crazy things like that. So there's clearly a moment there where artists were leaning into it more. You had Erykah Badu and others doing their thing. You don't hear about any of that stuff anymore. And sure, you could put some of it on the pandemic, but I think part of it goes back into some of these other things we talked about, whether it's the opportunity cost and whether they just felt like there was as much of a focus there. And I know some of the people that have been on those teams working and have helped with those things in the past, I think most of those people have since went on and moved to other companies.
And I think part of it is just the competition today of your live video amongst all this other content and all these other things that people could be watching. But I think there are still artists that are using it. It just takes a specific personality, because with the other types of social content, artists can plan it and slot it into their days or have help with it in ways that I feel like you can't on IG Live. It's live. Some artists just go on and are in their sweatpants, but others want their glam and all this. So I think it takes a certain artist. I get notifications, or I did when I had Instagram, all the time of Doja Cat is live. That girl goes live all the time. And I think it fits her brand. I know FKA Twigs was recently going live and just like talking to fans about her new album. I think people are still doing it. It's a lot harder to make a splash with it because it's so easy for it to just get lost in the sea of content. And it comes down to an opportunity cost too. Artists are some of the busiest people. Even if the Instagram Live touches a lot of people and is fun for the artist and it feels good, if it's not reaching a certain level of success, they might just say, I can't fit it into my day.
How much of this do we think is on the artist versus the platform of Instagram and what they prioritize? Because on the artist side, while I agree, I feel like Twitch has still been doing its thing, and maybe the numbers aren't peak pandemic numbers, but again, that goes into the user behavior, I should say, and what you go to for a particular platform for. So I feel like fans interacting with artists and engaging with them on virtual live streams still does feel like it's a thing that's happened. It feels like it doesn't happen as much on Instagram specifically because maybe Instagram's opportunity cost for focusing more on Reels is much higher than Twitch doing anything different than what Twitch is obviously known for.
Twitch is investing everything into making live streaming work, whereas with Instagram, it's just like one of so many things that it could be focusing on as a company. But I also think that the real reason isn't the artist or the platform. I think it's like the attention economy. It's society. You know, it's the competition and just how hard it is to break through and get people paying attention to your content. Even the fact that live streams are longer than 30 seconds makes it harder to get people's attention on them.
Where would you put music videos in this category, specifically for Meta? Because similar to Facebook Watch and some of its video efforts, it feels like it's also been this thing that has came and went and where it actually fits in the company strategy.
I guess with music videos, it's like part of it is the format as a whole doesn't carry as much weight as it used to. So I think part of it is like the format itself. But it also might just be one of those things where YouTube is such a leader in music videos. You think music videos, you immediately think YouTube. Maybe it was just hard to get people to use a different platform. I don't know. Even though they're already on it and the feature is there. To our point about just because the features exist doesn't mean that people use all these platforms the same way.
This also makes me think of podcasting specifically and its strategy overall. Hey, we see you have a podcast. We're launching our own podcast player. We have billions of users here. Would you like to bring your podcast on to Facebook? And I remember there were two options. You could either bring it on solely as a host, or you could just additionally put your show on Facebook. I did the latter. I did not bring my whole entire show there as the host platform for it, because I think this, again, can be a bit of a challenge for a lot of creators, a lot of these social media platforms. I know because I get reached out to by a lot of them when they have different initiatives. It's a little tough because they may put all these efforts in, but then their leadership says, oh, hey, we're cutting that program. Where I'm not going to put all my sweat equity into writing articles on Twitter or some of these other platforms. That's why people want to build on these owned platforms where there aren't algorithms to be able to have there be a home for it and use these other platforms to amplify it. So I also wasn't surprised when Facebook came and went, and within 2 years they axed that. And when you compare that to what we're seeing now with Spotify and YouTube, companies that reach, frankly, a fraction of the people that Meta and Facebook specifically does, but again, it's just more closely related to the user experience of what people go to Spotify and YouTube for, as opposed to what they go to Facebook for.
It's interesting that maybe there is a platform that has done this, but I feel like no major platform has become like the sort of super app that I feel like that term was getting thrown around a lot. And despite all of these apps having all these things in it, people are still using all of the platforms. They're not using one for everything. And so when you add, even though Facebook had at one point gaming and podcasts and articles and music videos, people weren't using it. So why can't we succeed at that? Why has no one been able to create the super app?
Would you want a super app as a user?
Honestly, as someone who struggles to keep track of all these platforms, yes, but wanting it and thinking that it's possible are two different things. I ideally would love there to be one place where a lot of this stuff happens, but I think it would be really hard to nail everything. It's hard to get everything right.
I want a super platform to keep track so I don't like miss things, or is it actually to be like entertained?
Not really about missing things, but I did have Instagram. This was part of the reason I deleted it too, was because I was like, I have people sending me DMs on Instagram, but then I also have emails to answer, and then I also have text to answer. And I was just like, I just want to get rid of one of these because I just feel like I'm spending too much time trying to keep track of conversations, trying to keep up with everything. So I guess you're right. A little bit of it was like, oh, am I missing somebody's update or like whatever?
I could also see this being extremely annoying for you in your previous life as a journalist at Billboard.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Totally. I don't think I can get away from it entirely because in a way I feel like it's part of my job to research to be on these platforms, or else I wouldn't be able to talk about them or understand the impact that they have.
All right, so if you had to pick one of these Meta ecosystem platforms, which one would you be a monthly active user for? And we're just talking monthly, so you can just check in on March 20th and you don't got to check again for another month.
I guess Instagram, but I don't really want to. But if I had to, because I do sometimes get value from, I like seeing my friends' updates. Sometimes I'll see a restaurant that, oh, that looks good, and then I'll go there and enjoy it. I get inspiration for things, probably Instagram, but I would be kicking and screaming.
It's funny. That was the one I thought you were going to say. I thought you were probably going to pick the least meta of them and pick Threads or WhatsApp or something like that.
It's a tough call for me. I could go any of the ways if I really convinced myself.
No, I think that's fair. Threads has grown on me. It definitely isn't pre-pandemic Twitter, but there are aspects of it that feel similar-ish, which I do enjoy. Instagram, I think I could be fine without. But honestly, WhatsApp, I feel like I'm just using more and more of the group chats are going there. a bunch
Yeah.
of family stuff, especially internationally. And if you're like me and if you have West Indian relatives and family members, those group chats are
yeah.
always buzzing.
I would switch to WhatsApp if everything went there. I just hate having it split up between multiple platforms.
Hey, if WhatsApp eats the world as it plans to, we'll see.
Catch me on there as a monthly active user.
Tati, this was a lot of fun and appreciate you coming on. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks for watching us on YouTube. For more breakdowns like this on the business of entertainment, media, and technology, make sure you like and subscribe to stay up to the latest on any of the insights that we have on Trapital, and make sure that you tell a friend about it as well. That helps continue to make sure that our show reaches the right people. Thanks again. Talk to you next time. Thanks for watching us on YouTube. For more breakdowns like this on the business of entertainment, media, and technology, make sure you like and subscribe to stay up to the latest on any of the insights that we have on Trapital, and make sure that you tell a friend about it as well. That helps continue to make sure that our show reaches the right people. Thanks again. Talk to you next time.